A single dad delivered to the wrong address, but when the lonely housewife opened the door, what she suggested not only shocked him, it threatened to tear apart two families, expose a community's darkest gossip, and force one heartbreaking question. Can kindness meant to heal ever survive suspicion and betrayal? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The rain drummed steadily against the windshield of Daniel Brooks' old sedan as he squinted through the foggy glass at house numbers along Maple Street. His delivery shift had run late, and now he was trying to squeeze in one last package drop-off before picking up groceries with his kids. "Dad, I'm hungry," Emma called from the back seat, her voice tinged with the familiar whine of a tired 9-year-old. "Just a few more minutes, sweetheart," Daniel promised, glancing in the rearview mirror at his daughter and 7-year-old son Jacob, who was absorbed in his worn comic book. The interior light cast a dim glow over their faces, making the shadows under their eyes more pronounced. It had been a long day for all of them. Daniel pulled up to the curb, double-checking the address on his phone. 1247 Maple Street, he muttered to himself. "You two stay put, okay? I'll be right back." Gathering the package and his umbrella, Daniel stepped out into the steady downpour. The evening air was cool and damp, carrying the earthy scent of rain-soaked grass. Water splashed against his worn work boots as he navigated puddles up the walkway to a welcoming 2-story house with warm yellow light spilling from its windows. The porch light flickered on as he approached, and Daniel carefully balanced the package while trying to keep his umbrella steady. Before he could ring the doorbell, the door swung open, revealing a woman with kind eyes and auburn hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. "Oh, hello there," she said, her smile genuine and warm. Daniel cleared his throat. "Good evening, ma'am. Delivery for?" He glanced down at the label and felt his stomach drop. The house number was 1274, not 1247. He'd reversed the numbers in his hurry. "I am so sorry," he began, embarrassment flooding his cheeks. "I've made a mistake. This isn't actually—" Before he could finish his apology, a small face peeked around the woman's legs. A little girl, about 7 years old, with her mother's auburn hair in 2 braids, looked up at Daniel with curious eyes. "Mommy," she said clearly, tugging on her mother's sweater. "Is this the man you've been waiting for?" The woman's eyes widened, and a slight blush colored her cheeks. "Lily," she exclaimed, then let out a gentle laugh that somehow made Daniel feel less awkward about the whole situation. "I'm so sorry. My daughter has quite the imagination." "No, I'm the one who should apologize," Daniel said, shifting his weight. "I got the address wrong. This was meant for 1247. A particularly strong gust of wind drove the rain sideways, and Daniel stumbled slightly on the wet porch, trying to keep the package dry. The woman, who introduced herself as Grace Turner, took in his drenched appearance and the way he was struggling with the umbrella and package. "Why don't you come in for a moment, at least until this downpour lets up a bit?" "Oh, I couldn't." Daniel started to decline, thinking of Emma and Jacob waiting in the car. "Are those your children in the car?" Grace asked, peering past him into the rainy darkness. Daniel nodded, surprised she'd noticed. "Well, bring them in too. We just made hot chocolate and there's plenty to share." Daniel hesitated, but another glance at the heavy rain made up his mind. "Let me get them and the groceries. Thank you, Mrs. Turner. This is very kind of you." "Please, call me Grace," she said warmly. "Lily, help me get some extra mugs ready." Minutes later, Daniel found himself in Grace's cozy kitchen, watching as Emma and Jacob sat at the counter with Lily, all 3 children clutching steaming mugs of hot chocolate topped with tiny marshmallows. The grocery bags sat safely by the door, and Grace was pouring tea for the adults. "I really appreciate this," Daniel said, accepting the mug she offered. "It's been one of those days." "I know exactly what you mean," Grace replied, settling onto a kitchen stool. "Sometimes a moment of kindness from a stranger is exactly what we need." The children were already chattering away like old friends, with Lily showing Emma and Jacob her collection of seashells displayed on the windowsill. The warm kitchen smelled of chocolate and cinnamon, and Daniel felt some of the day's tension begin to ease from his shoulders. "So you do deliveries?" Grace asked. blowing gently on her tea. "Among other things," Daniel admitted. "It's just evening shifts after my regular job. Trying to make ends meet, you know?" Grace nodded understanding. "It can't be easy, especially with 2 children." Something in her tone made Daniel look up from his tea. There was no pity in her expression, just genuine empathy that made him feel surprisingly comfortable. "My husband's deployed overseas," she offered, answering his unspoken question. "The military life. Well, let's just say I understand about making things work on your own." A crack of thunder made all 3 children jump, then giggle nervously. "Look at the lightning!" Lily exclaimed, pointing to the window where brief flashes illuminated the darkened street. "It's like nature's own light show," Grace said, smiling at the children's excitement. She turned back to Daniel. "Please don't feel rushed. The weather report said this system should pass through quickly." Daniel watched as Jacob, usually so shy with strangers, helped Lily arrange her seashells in a new pattern, while Emma told them about the time she saw lightning strike a tree at their grandparents' house. The scene felt so natural, so comfortable, that it almost hurt, reminding him of evenings before Sarah's illness, when their own kitchen had been full of warmth and laughter. "Thank you," he said quietly to Grace, "not just for the tea, but for—" He gestured vaguely at the children, not quite able to put into words how much this simple moment of normalcy meant. Grace seemed to understand. "Sometimes the wrong address turns out to be exactly the right place," she said softly, then quickly added, "even if the actual package still needs to get to 1,247. Her gentle humor broke the moment's tension, and Daniel found himself chuckling. "Yes, I suppose I should properly finish my route once the rain lets up." As if on cue, the downpour began to soften, the thunder moving off into the distance. The kitchen felt like a warm island of light and comfort in the rainy evening, and for the first time in a long while, Daniel felt the weight of his daily struggles lift just a little. Grace's kitchen was a warm haven from the storm outside. Yellow walls and copper pots hanging from a rack gave the room a gentle glow, while the kettle whistled cheerfully on the stovetop. Daniel sat awkwardly at the round wooden table, his rain-dampened jacket draped over the back of his chair. "Milk or sugar?" Grace asked, reaching for 2 mismatched mugs from an open shelf. "Just plain is fine, thanks." Daniel wrapped his hands around the steaming cup she set before him, grateful for its warmth. His fingers were still cold and stiff from carrying packages in the rain. A loud crack of thunder made them both jump, and little footsteps came pattering down the hallway. Grace's daughter appeared in the doorway, clutching a stuffed rabbit. "Mommy, I'm scared," she whispered, her eyes wide. "Come here, sweetie." Grace opened her arms and the little girl climbed onto her lap. "Mr. Brooks, this is my daughter Lily. Lily, can you say hello?" Lily buried her face in her mother's shoulder, but peeked out with one eye. "Hi," she mumbled. Daniel smiled gently. "Hello, Lily. That's a nice rabbit you've got there." The girl lifted her head slightly. "His name is Hoppy." "Well, Hoppy looks very brave. I bet he helps keep the thunder away, doesn't he?" Lily nodded, relaxing a little. Grace stroked her daughter's hair. "Why don't you go pick out a story for bedtime? I'll be there in a few minutes." Once Lily had scampered off, Grace sighed. The storms always make her nervous when her daddy's away. "Your husband's deployed?" Daniel asked, taking a sip of his tea. Grace nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "Third tour. He's been gone 8 months now. 4 more to go." She attempted a smile, but Daniel could see the strain behind it. "The video calls help, but it's not the same, you know." "That must be tough," Daniel said quietly, "especially with a little one." "We manage." Grace straightened her shoulders. "The military community here is wonderful, though sometimes I think the neighbors check on me a little too much." She laughed softly. "Mrs. Peterson from next door brings over casseroles at least twice a week. I'm running out of room in my freezer." Daniel smiled, thinking of his own nearly empty freezer at home. "Sounds nice, actually. I'm not much of a cook myself." "No?" Grace tilted her head. "Your wife handles the cooking?" The familiar ache squeezed Daniel's chest. He stared down at his tea, debating how much to share. She used to. Sarah passed away 2 years ago." "Oh." Grace's voice softened with genuine concern. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have assumed. It's okay, Daniel assured her quickly. You couldn't have known. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the steady drumming of rain against the windows. Grace didn't push for details or offer empty platitudes, and Daniel found himself grateful for that. It's just me and the kids now, he found himself saying. Emma's 9 and Jacob's 7. We're still figuring things out, but we're getting there. Grace nodded thoughtfully. Children are remarkably resilient, aren't they? Though I'm sure it hasn't been easy. No, Daniel admitted. But they're worth every struggle. He paused, then added, Sarah was a nurse. Actually, she worked at the Veterans Memorial Hospital before. Grace's eyes widened. Veterans Memorial? That's where Tom, my husband, was treated last year when he got that bad infection during leave. I practically lived in that waiting room for a week. Sarah loved working there, Daniel said, a bittersweet smile tugging at his lips. She always said military families were special, that they understood sacrifice and loyalty in a way most people don't. She sounds like she was an amazing woman. She was. Daniel took another sip of tea, surprised to find he could talk about Sarah without the usual sharp pain. There was something about Grace's quiet understanding that made it easier. Lightning flickered outside, followed by another rumble of thunder. Grace glanced at the clock on the wall. The storm's moving east, should clear up soon. Daniel noticed his tea was almost gone. I should probably get going. My kids are waiting in the car, and I still need to grab groceries before the store closes. Oh my goodness, they're in the car? In this weather? Grace stood up, concern etching her features. You should have said something. Poor things must be so bored. They're used to it, Daniel said, though guilt nagged at him. Emma has her books, and Jacob never goes anywhere without his comics. Grace began gathering some cookies from a jar on the counter. Here, take these for them. Lily and I baked them yesterday. That's very kind, but you don't have to. I insist. She wrapped them in a paper napkin and pressed them into his hands. Then, with a hint of mischief in her eyes, she added, You know, maybe you should bring your kids by tomorrow. We'd love the company. Lily doesn't get many chances to play with other children outside of school. Daniel hesitated, caught off guard by the invitation. Part of him wanted to politely decline. It seemed too personal, too complicated. But he thought of Emma and Jacob, how they'd light up at the prospect of making new friends. I'll think about it, he said finally, standing and retrieving his jacket. Thank you for the tea, and I'm sorry again about the wrong delivery. Grace walked him to the door, where the porch light cast a warm glow through the lessening rain. Sometimes mistakes turn out to be blessings in disguise, don't they? Daniel stepped out into the cool, damp air, the package of cookies tucked carefully in his jacket pocket. The storm was moving on, leaving behind that fresh, clean scent that always followed rain. As he walked back to his car, he found himself considering Grace's invitation, wondering if perhaps she was right about blessings in disguise. Morning sunlight streamed through the Brooks kitchen window as Daniel flipped pancakes on the old stovetop. The familiar scent of butter and maple syrup filled their small home, but his mind kept drifting back to Grace's invitation from the night before. Daddy, are these blueberry ones? Jacob bounced in his chair, fork already in hand. His Superman pajamas had a small syrup stain from yesterday's breakfast. Plain today, buddy. We're running low on groceries. Daniel slid 2 golden pancakes onto Jacob's plate, then turned to Emma. How many for you, sweetie? Emma sat quietly, her long brown hair still messy from sleep. 2, please. She watched her father with those observant eyes that sometimes reminded him so much of her mother. Dad, can we do something fun today? We haven't gone anywhere in forever. Daniel's stomach tightened. Money was tight, and most fun activities cost more than he could spare. He stacked Emma's pancakes on her plate, buying time before answering. Yeah, Jacob chimed in, mouthful of pancake. Can we go to the park? Or the library? Or, actually, Daniel said slowly, surprising himself, I met someone nice yesterday. A lady named Grace and her daughter Lily. They invited us over to visit. Emma's eyes lit up. Really? How old is Lily? 7, I think. Around your age. Daniel sat down with his own plate, watching his children's reactions carefully. Jacob wiggled in his seat. Does she have any cool toys? Does she like superheroes? I don't know, but she seems very nice. Her mom is nice too. Daniel cut into his pancakes, trying to sound casual. We could stop by this afternoon if you want. Yes, both kids exclaimed in unison. An hour later, after showers and careful outfit selections, Emma changed twice, they pulled up to Grace's house. It looked different in the daylight. Cheerful red shutters, flower boxes full of pink petunias, and a neat brick pathway leading to the front door. Before Daniel could even knock, the door swung open. Lily stood there in a yellow dress, practically vibrating with excitement. You came. Mom, they're here. Grace appeared behind her daughter, wearing a flour-dusted apron. Perfect timing. We're just about to start making chocolate chip cookies. Come in, come in. Emma and Lily sized each other up for approximately 3 seconds before Lily grabbed Emma's hand. Want to see my room? I have the coolest dollhouse ever. The girls disappeared upstairs in a flutter of giggles, leaving Jacob shifting from foot to foot in the entryway. Grace knelt down to his level. Would you like to help me with the cookies? I could use an expert taste tester. Jacob's face broke into a huge grin. I'm the best at tasting cookies. He followed Grace into the kitchen, leaving Daniel standing awkwardly in the hallway. Make yourself at home, Grace called back. There's fresh coffee in the living room. Daniel wandered into the living room, taking in the comfortable furniture and family photos on the walls. Many showed a handsome man in military uniform, Grace's husband, he assumed. The room felt lived in and welcoming, with a basket of yarn next to an armchair and children's books neatly stacked on a coffee table. From the kitchen came the sounds of Jacob's excited voice. Can I crack the eggs? I'm really good at it. Sure thing, sweetheart. Here, let me show you how to catch any shells that fall in. Daniel sank into the armchair, coffee in hand, listening to the happy chaos echoing through the house. Upstairs, he could hear the girls playing, their voices drifting down. This is Princess Aurora. She's a doctor and an astronaut. Cool. Can she be friends with my doll? She's a scientist who studies dragons. Perfect. They can go on adventures together. The afternoon passed in a blur of warmth and laughter. Jacob proudly presented the first batch of cookies, his shirt spotted with flour but his smile enormous. The girls came downstairs to sample the treats, their faces flushed with excitement from playing. Grace moved through it all with easy grace, making sure everyone had milk with their cookies, asking Emma about school, listening to Jacob's detailed explanation of why Superman could definitely beat Batman in a fight. Daniel found himself relaxing, really relaxing, for the first time in what felt like years. He even joined in when Grace started a game of Pictionary. Though his attempt at drawing an elephant made everyone laugh so hard, Jacob nearly fell off his chair. As the afternoon light began to fade, Daniel noticed the time. We should probably head home soon. School night and all that. Aw, Dad, Emma protested. Just 5 more minutes? Can we come back tomorrow? Jacob added, chocolate smeared on his cheek. Grace smiled, wiping Jacob's face with a napkin. You're welcome any time. Maybe next weekend we could have a proper barbecue? Daniel helped gather their things, touched by how carefully Grace packed extra cookies for them to take home. The kids hugged Lily goodbye, as if they'd known her forever. Standing in the doorway, Daniel felt a warmth in his chest he'd almost forgotten existed. Grace stood close, their shoulders almost touching as they watched the children's farewell performance of dramatic goodbye waves. Thank you, he said quietly. This was really nice. It was, Grace agreed, her voice soft. It's been too quiet here lately. As Daniel ushered his children toward the car, movement caught his eye. Across the street, an older woman stood in her front window, watching them intently. Her lined face was set in a distinct frown, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The warm feeling in Daniel's chest flickered slightly as he met her disapproving gaze. The Liberty Diner's bell chimed as Daniel pushed through the glass door, seeking his usual morning coffee before starting deliveries. Warm aromas of bacon and fresh-baked biscuits filled the air. He nodded at Mary, the waitress who'd known him since high school, and slid into his regular booth by the window. The usual on? Mary asked, already pouring steaming coffee into his ceramic mug. Thanks, Mary. Just coffee today. Daniel wrapped his hands around the warm cup, trying to shake off the morning chill. Two elderly women sat in the booth behind him, their voices carrying clearly, despite their attempts at whispering. "Did you hear about Grace Turner, the one whose husband's serving overseas?" Daniel's hand froze mid-reach for the sugar packets. "Oh yes," the other woman replied, her voice thick with disapproval. "Sarah from across the street saw that delivery man there yesterday, with his children no less. A single man spending time with a soldier's wife? It's just not right." Daniel's chest tightened. He stirred his coffee with more force than necessary, the spoon clinking against the ceramic. "And while Tom's fighting for our country," the first woman continued, "that poor man doesn't even know." The coffee suddenly tasted bitter in Daniel's mouth. He'd faced judgment before as a single dad, but this felt different. These weren't strangers making assumptions. These were people who'd known him his whole life. Mary approached with a concerned look. "You okay, Daniel? You're looking a bit pale." "I'm fine," he managed, pulling out his wallet. "Just remembered I need to get started on deliveries early today." As he stood to leave, his phone buzzed. Grace's name appeared on the screen, and he stepped outside before answering. "Daniel?" Grace's voice was warm and steady. "I hoped I'd catch you before your route." "Grace, He paused, unsure how to mention what he'd just heard. "Sarah called this morning," Grace said, a hint of frustration in her tone. "Apparently, she's very concerned about my reputation. And yours." Daniel leaned against the diner's brick wall, watching early morning traffic roll by. "I'm sorry. I should have thought about how it might look." "Stop right there," Grace cut in firmly. "Let them talk. Kindness is bigger than gossip. Besides, I have the perfect solution." Despite himself, Daniel smiled. "Why do I get the feeling you're about to rope me into something?" "Because you're perceptive," Grace laughed. "The church needs help organizing their annual bake sale fundraiser. Usually I handle it alone, but this year," she paused meaningfully. "You want me to help? Think about it. Working together in plain sight for the church. Nothing secretive or scandalous about that. Plus, my monster cookies always sell out first, and I could use an extra pair of hands." Daniel thought of the whispers in the diner, then of the genuine warmth he'd felt yesterday watching their children play together. "Your monster cookies, huh? Legendary status. Even Pastor Mike fights for the last one." "Well, I do make a mean apple pie. My mom's recipe." "Perfect! See? God works in mysterious ways. Those gossipy birds will be fighting over your pie slices before you know it." Daniel found himself chuckling, the weight of the morning's overheard conversations lifting slightly. "When do we start? How about this afternoon? The kids can play while we plan. I'll make lunch." He hesitated only briefly. "Count us in. But Grace? Thank you for not letting them chase away a good thing." Daniel Brooks, "In my experience, the best things in life often come disguised as complications. I'll see you at 1. We'll be there." Hanging up, Daniel stood straighter, squaring his shoulders. Let them talk, he thought, heading to his delivery van. Sometimes the bravest thing wasn't fighting back. It was simply continuing to do what you knew was right. Looking at his phone again, he smiled at Grace's final text. "Don't forget, legendary monster cookies await." For the first time that morning, the sun felt warm on his face, and the day ahead looked brighter than before. He had deliveries to make, children to love, and apparently a bake sale to help organize. Life had a funny way of working out, especially when others tried to complicate it. The autumn morning sun cast long shadows across the church lawn as Daniel unloaded folding tables from his truck. His daughter Emma skipped beside him, carrying a checkered tablecloth that was almost too big for her small frame. His son Jacob trailed behind, carefully balancing a box of paper plates and napkins. "Over here, Daniel," Grace called from the church steps, waving with one hand while holding onto little Lily with the other. Her smile brightened the crisp morning air. "I think this spot gets the best sunshine." Daniel nodded, setting up the first table. The metal legs clicked into place with a satisfying snap. "Emma, want to help spread that tablecloth?" Emma beamed, proud to have such an important job. She and Lily worked together, giggling as they tried to keep the cloth from blowing in the gentle breeze. their laughter mixed with the cheerful gospel music drifting from the church's outdoor speakers. "My goodness, you've brought quite the workforce," Mrs. Peterson, the church secretary, remarked as she emerged from the building carrying a tray of brownies. Her eyes crinkled warmly at the sight of all the children helping. More church members arrived, bearing cookies, pies, and cakes. Soon the tables were filled with sweet treats, each carefully labeled with ingredients and prices. Grace had organized everything perfectly, right down to the bright yellow price tags and decorated donation jar. "Okay, troops," Grace announced, clapping her hands together. "Who wants to be our official taste testers?" All three children's hands shot up immediately, making the adults laugh. Daniel watched as Grace cut tiny samples of various desserts, making sure each child got an equal share. She had such a natural way with kids, patient and playful, but firm when needed. It reminded him of Sarah, and for once the memory didn't sting quite so much. "These are the best cookies ever," Jacob declared, chocolate chip crumbs dotting his chin. "Thank you, sweetheart," Grace replied, reaching out to wipe his face with a napkin, "but save room for the customers." The morning grew warmer as people began arriving for the bake sale. Daniel manned the cash box while Grace chatted with customers, describing each treat with such enthusiasm that few could resist buying something. The children took turns holding up signs by the street, drawing more people in with their eager waves. "You're doing a wonderful job with them," Grace said quietly, as she helped Daniel make change for a customer. "They're such happy kids, despite everything." Daniel felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Some days are harder than others," he admitted. "But they make it worth it." "I can tell." Grace's eyes were soft with understanding. "You're a good father, Daniel. Don't let anyone tell you different." From the corner of his eye, Daniel noticed Mrs. Harrison and her bridge club friends huddled near the church entrance, whispering behind their hands as they looked his way. But before the familiar weight of judgment could settle on his shoulders, Father Michael approached their table. "This is exactly what our community needed," the priest said, beaming at them both. "Thank you both for organizing this. The proceeds will help so many families this winter." "It was Grace's idea," Daniel said quickly. "I just helped with the heavy lifting." "Don't sell yourself short," Grace protested. "You've been here since dawn, and your kids have been absolute angels helping out." The afternoon passed in a blur of transactions and conversations. Even some of the usually stern-faced neighbors seemed to soften as they watched Daniel help Emma count change or lift Jacob up to hang decorations. More than a few left with boxes full of baked goods and genuine smiles. As the sun began to set, they packed up the few remaining treats. The donation jar was satisfyingly full, and Father Michael's grateful handshake told Daniel that they'd exceeded expectations. "Let me drive you home," Daniel offered, seeing Grace trying to manage both the sleepy Lily and the empty containers. "That would be wonderful, thank you." The short drive to Grace's house was quiet, all three children dozing in the back seat. When they pulled up to her porch, Grace turned to him with eyes bright in the twilight. "Daniel, you're a blessing more than you know," she said softly, touching his arm before gathering up her sleeping daughter. As Daniel drove home with his own tired children, his heart felt lighter than it had in months. Emma stirred in the back seat. "Dad, can we do that again sometime?" "Yeah," Daniel smiled, catching her eye in the rear-view mirror. "I think we can." Sunday morning dawned bright and clear, a welcome change from the recent rainy weather. Daniel sat at his worn kitchen table, helping Emma with her math homework, while Jacob concentrated on a coloring book nearby. The gentle scratching of pencils and rustling of paper filled the quiet house. A knock at the door startled them all. Daniel wasn't expecting anyone, especially not on a Sunday morning. Emma's face lit up as she peered through the window. "It's Grace and Lily," she exclaimed, already rushing to the door. Daniel quickly straightened his t-shirt and ran a hand through his disheveled hair. He hadn't planned on company, and the house wasn't exactly in perfect order. Toys scattered the living room floor, and breakfast dishes still sat in the sink. When he opened the door, Grace stood there with Lily bouncing excitedly beside her. She held a basket covered with a checkered cloth, and the warm smell of freshly baked muffins wafted through the doorway. "Good morning." Grace's smile was warm and genuine. "We thought you might like some company and fresh blueberry muffins." "Blueberry is my favorite," Jacob called from inside, abandoning his coloring book. Daniel stepped back, gesturing them inside. "Please, come in. Sorry about the mess, we weren't expecting visitors." "Oh, please." Grace waved off his concern. "A lived-in home is a happy home. You should see our place when Lily gets creative with her art supplies." The children immediately gravitated toward each other, as they had since that first visit. Emma took Lily's hand, leading her to show off her new stuffed animals, while Jacob trailed behind them. "Would you like some coffee?" Daniel offered, suddenly aware of how domestic this felt. "I just made a fresh pot." "That would be lovely," Grace replied. "But it's such a beautiful morning, maybe we could sit on the porch?" Daniel nodded, grateful for the suggestion. The porch felt safer somehow, more neutral ground. He grabbed 2 mugs of coffee, while Grace arranged the muffins on a plate she'd found in his cabinet. The wooden porch swing creaked softly as they settled into it, watching the children play in the front yard. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and approaching autumn. "These are amazing," Daniel said after biting into a muffin. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble." Grace was quiet for a moment, cradling her coffee mug. Her expression grew more serious, and Daniel could sense she had something on her mind. "Daniel," she began, her voice gentle but determined, "I've been thinking a lot about you and the kids lately." He tensed slightly, unsure where this was going. "I see how hard you work," she continued. "How you're trying to be everything for them. Mother, father, provider, friend. It's a heavy burden to carry alone." Daniel stared into his coffee, his throat tight. No one had really acknowledged that before, not so directly. "I'm managing," he said quietly, but even he could hear the weariness in his voice. Grace turned to face him more fully. "You are. You're doing an amazing job, but you shouldn't have to do it all alone." She paused, then took a deep breath. "You and the kids shouldn't be alone so much. Come over for dinners. Let's be family while we wait for better days." Daniel's head snapped up, surprised by the boldness of her suggestion. The word family hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning and possibility. "Grace, he started, then stopped, overwhelmed by the simple kindness of her offer. "People are already talking. Let them talk," she said firmly. "What matters is what's best for the children. For all of us." She gestured to where their kids were playing, their laughter carrying across the yard. "Look at them, Daniel. They need this. We all do." He watched as Emma showed Lily how to make a daisy chain, while Jacob carefully gathered more flowers for them. The scene brought a lump to his throat. It had been so long since he'd seen his children this carefree, this happy. "I don't want to complicate your life," he said finally. "Your husband—" "Tom would understand," Grace interrupted softly. "He knows what it means to need support, to need family. Sometimes family isn't just who we're born to or marry. It's who God brings into our lives when we need them most." Daniel felt something shift inside him, like a weight he'd been carrying was finally being shared. The offer was simple, yet profound. Dinner, company, connection. Normal things that had seemed out of reach for so long. "You're sure about this?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Grace nodded, her eyes kind, but determined. "Completely sure. Start with dinner tomorrow night? I'm making lasagna, and I always make too much anyway." Daniel looked at his children again, saw how they'd bloomed in just these few weeks of knowing Grace and Lily. He thought about lonely evenings of microwave dinners, of Emma trying to be too grown up too soon, of Jacob's quiet withdrawal. Then he thought about warm kitchen lights, shared meals, adult conversation, and children's laughter. "Okay," he said finally, the word coming out half whisper, half prayer. "Thank you." Grace squeezed his arm gently, understanding all he wasn't saying. They sat in comfortable silence, drinking their coffee and watching the children play, while Daniel's mind raced with equal parts hope and worry about what this new chapter might bring. The morning sun climbed higher, casting their shadows long across the porch, as they sat together in the gentle quiet of a Sunday morning that felt like the beginning of something both wonderful and dangerous. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Grace's front yard as Daniel's car pulled into the driveway. Emma and Jacob tumbled out, backpacks bouncing, already racing toward the porch where Lily waited with her usual bright smile. Inside, the aroma of Grace's lasagna filled the house, making Daniel's stomach rumble. "Perfect timing," Grace called from the kitchen. "Could use a hand with these garlic rolls." Daniel rolled up his sleeves and fell into what had become a comfortable routine. The kitchen was warm and inviting, with homework papers spread across one end of the table and dinner preparations at the other. Lily and Emma had already claimed their usual spots, heads bent together over their spelling worksheets. "Did you see Mrs. Peterson watching us again?" Grace asked quietly as she handed Daniel the butter brush. Her tone was light, but he caught the concern in her eyes. "Hard to miss," Daniel replied, focusing on brushing butter over the rolls. "She was watering the same patch of flowers for 20 minutes straight." Grace's laugh was soft but genuine. "Well, her petunias must be drowning by now." Jacob wandered into the kitchen, clutching his math workbook. "Miss Grace, can you help me with fractions?" Dad tries, but he makes funny faces when he has to explain it. "Hey now," Daniel protested, but he was smiling. Grace was better at teaching math. She had a way of making everything seem simple and clear. The evening flowed like honey, sweet and unhurried. They gathered around the table, passing plates and sharing stories about their day. Emma proudly showed off her art project, and Lily demonstrated her new dance routine. These moments felt right, felt whole in a way Daniel hadn't experienced since losing his wife. After dinner, while the kids sprawled in the living room watching a cartoon, Daniel and Grace tackled the dishes together. Their system was wordless now. He washed, she dried, their movements synchronized like dancers who'd practiced for years instead of weeks. "Did you hear what happened at the grocery store yesterday?" Grace asked, stacking plates. "Mrs. Collins practically sprinted down another aisle when she saw me coming." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I'm sorry. This is my fault." "Stop that right now," Grace said firmly, swatting him with the dish towel. "You haven't done anything wrong. We haven't done anything wrong. Sometimes people just need something to talk about, and we're apparently more interesting than the weather." Through the kitchen window, Daniel could see Mr. Harrison across the street, pretending to trim his hedges while stealing glances at Grace's house. The neighbors' scrutiny was becoming more obvious, their whispers less subtle. But inside this kitchen, with the sounds of children's laughter floating in from the next room, it was hard to care what anyone else thought. Later, as the sky deepened to purple, they herded the kids upstairs for their nightly ritual. Grace read from a chapter book while the children curled up on Lily's bed, fighting sleep. Daniel sat in the reading chair by the window, watching his children's faces grow peaceful and drowsy. These moments felt like photographs being taken, precious instances he wanted to preserve forever. When the kids were finally settled, Daniel and Grace retreated downstairs. The house was quiet now, filled with the kind of comfort that comes from shared routines and unspoken understanding. "You know," Grace said, settling onto the couch with a cup of tea, "Emma told me today that she hasn't had nightmares all week. Not since we started these dinners." Daniel's heart squeezed. Emma's nightmares had been a constant worry since her mother died. "Really?" Grace nodded, her eyes soft. "You're doing an amazing job with them, Daniel. I hope you know that." He looked down at his hands, emotion thick in his throat. "Some days I'm not so sure, but here, with you, it feels like we can breathe again." Through the front window, a car drove by slowly, too slowly. Daniel recognized it as belonging to one of the church ladies who'd been particularly vocal about their situation. Grace noticed too, but she just shook her head and smiled. "Let them look," she said. "They'll get tired eventually, and meanwhile we'll just keep being there for each other." It was time to go. Daniel gathered Jacob, who was half asleep, into his arms while Emma trudged drowsily toward the door. At the threshold, Grace touched his arm. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being my strength through all this, for not letting their gossip chase you away." Their hands brushed as she helped him with Jacob's backpack. The touch was brief, innocent, but it sent a current through Daniel's skin. Their eyes met in the porch light, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Then Jacob stirred in his arms, breaking the spell. Grace stepped back, her smile gentle but guarded. Daniel nodded goodnight, carefully carrying his son to the car while Emma followed, yawning. As they drove home, the streetlights casting warm pools on the pavement, Daniel could still feel the ghost of Grace's touch on his hand. He pushed the feeling away, focusing instead on the steady breathing of his sleeping children in the back seat. The morning dew still clung to the grass as Daniel pulled up to Mrs. Jenkins's modest white house. The elderly neighbor stood on her porch, arms crossed, watching as Grace's minivan parked right behind him. Her weathered fence lay partially collapsed along the side yard, victims of last week's windstorm. "About time someone noticed," Mrs. Jenkins called out, her voice carrying a mix of complaint and relief. "Been looking at that eyesore for days now." Daniel grabbed his toolbox from the trunk while Grace helped Emma, Jacob, and Lily out of her van. The children immediately ran to Mrs. Jenkins's flower garden, careful not to step on the blooms. "Good morning, Mrs. Jenkins," Grace said warmly. "We brought some coffee cake, too." She held up a covered dish that made the older woman's expression soften slightly. "Well, come on then," Mrs. Jenkins gestured. "Might as well have breakfast while we survey the damage." As they walked the fence line, Daniel assessed the broken posts and splintered boards. His carpenter's eye noticed things others might miss. "We can salvage most of it," he said, already forming a plan. "Just need to replace these 2 posts and reinforce the rest." Grace organized the children into a cleanup crew, making a game of collecting the smaller pieces of broken wood. Mrs. Jenkins watched from her porch rocker, sipping coffee and sharing neighborhood stories that made Grace laugh. "Did you know," Mrs. Jenkins said between bites of coffee cake, "that house across the street used to belong to the town doctor? Had the prettiest rose garden you ever saw?" Daniel worked steadily, the familiar rhythm of hammering and measuring, bringing back memories of his construction days. Grace kept him company, holding boards steady and passing tools. Her capable hands and quick learning impressed him. "You're pretty good at this," he said, as she perfectly aligned a crossbeam. "Military wife," she replied with a wink. "You learned to be handy." By mid-morning, other neighbors began to notice. The Wilsons from next door brought over lemonade. Old Mr. Peterson shuffled by with his walker and stayed to watch, offering occasional advice that made Mrs. Jenkins roll her eyes. "You know," Mr. Peterson mentioned, "my back steps could use some attention too." Grace exchanged a knowing look with Daniel. "We'd be happy to help," she said. "Maybe next weekend?" As the morning wore on, more neighbors stopped by. Mrs. Chen brought homemade dumplings. The Rodriguez kids joined Emma, Jacob, and Lily in their cleanup game. What started as a simple fence repair transformed into an impromptu block gathering. "My sister's laid up with a bad hip," Mrs. Jenkins mentioned during lunch. "Been meaning to take her some meals, but my arthritis makes cooking difficult these days." "We could help with that," Grace offered immediately. "Right, Daniel?" Daniel nodded, watching his children share their dumplings with the Rodriguez kids. "We could make it a regular thing. There must be others who could use a hand." That afternoon, after finishing Mrs. Jenkins' fence, they sat around her kitchen table making lists. Grace's organizational skills shone as she mapped out a schedule of meal deliveries and home repairs. The children contributed ideas, proud to be included in the planning. "Emma can help bake cookies," Daniel suggested, making his daughter beam, "and Jacob's getting pretty good at sorting tools." Mrs. Jenkins watched them work, her initial skepticism replaced by something warmer. "You two make quite a team," she observed quietly. The rest of the day flew by in a whirlwind of activity. They delivered Mrs. Jenkins' sister a casserole, checked on Mr. Peterson's steps, and helped Mrs. Chen carry groceries. The children tagged along eagerly, turning each errand into an adventure. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. By evening, Grace's phone was full of messages from people either offering to help or requesting assistance. What had started as a simple fence repair was growing into something bigger. "We could call it Neighbors Helping Neighbors," Grace suggested as they drove home in the sunset. "Make it official." Daniel glanced in his rear-view mirror at the tired but happy faces of his children. Emma was teaching Lily a clapping game while Jacob dozed against the window. The sight filled his heart with warmth. That night, as Daniel tucked his children into bed, Emma asked sleepily, "Can we help more people tomorrow, Daddy?" "We sure can, sweetheart." He smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "Did you have fun today?" "Mm-hmm," she mumbled, already drifting off. "I like helping with Grace and Lily. It feels like," she yawned, like family. Jacob was already asleep, clutching the toy hammer Grace had given him. Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, watching his children's peaceful faces in the soft glow of their nightlight. Kneeling between their beds, Daniel closed his eyes in prayer. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "for bringing such joy back into our lives. Thank you for Grace and Lily, for Mrs. Jenkins and all our neighbors. Thank you for giving us a chance to help others and find happiness again." He stayed there a moment longer, listening to his children's steady breathing, his heart full of gratitude for this unexpected gift of community and purpose they'd discovered together. The old town hall buzzed with energy on this warm spring evening. Twinkling lights draped across wooden beams, and the scent of fresh flowers, mixed with home-cooked dishes that lined the buffet tables. Children darted between clusters of chatting adults, their laughter mixing with the soft background music. Daniel adjusted his tie nervously. He wasn't used to wearing one anymore, but Emma had insisted, smoothing it down with her small hands before they left home. Now she and Jacob played tag with Lily and other kids near the punch bowl, while he stood awkwardly by the wall watching the room fill with familiar faces. "You clean up nice," Grace said, appearing beside him in a simple blue dress. Her eyes sparkled with something that made his heart skip. "Though you look like you'd rather be anywhere else. That obvious, huh?" Daniel chuckled, tugging at his collar. "I'm more comfortable with a hammer than a tie these days." "Well, the annual spring charity gala wouldn't be the same without you this year." Grace handed him a glass of punch. "Everyone's been talking about all the work you've done." Daniel shook his head. "I just fix things that need fixing. Nothing special about that." The mayor stepped onto the small stage, tapping the microphone. The feedback made everyone wince. "Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our annual Spring Charity Gala." Daniel half listened to the usual speeches about community spirit and generous donations, watching instead as Emma showed Lily how to twirl in her party dress. His daughter had been smiling more lately, laughing like she used to before they lost her mother. "And now," the mayor continued, "we have a special recognition to make. Would Daniel Brooks please join me on stage?" Daniel froze. Grace gave him a gentle push forward. "Go on," she whispered. "You deserve this." His feet felt heavy as he made his way through the parting crowd. Scattered applause followed him up the 3 wooden steps to the stage. The lights felt too bright, and he could see his children beaming up at him from the front row. "Daniel Brooks moved to our town 2 years ago," the mayor began, "and since then he has quietly become one of our most dedicated volunteers. From fixing Mrs. Jenkins' fence to delivering meals to our homebound seniors, Daniel exemplifies the spirit of community service." Daniel shifted uncomfortably, but then he saw Grace step up to the microphone. She wore a warm smile that somehow made the bright lights seem less harsh. "I'd like to say a few words about Daniel," Grace began, her voice gentle but clear. "Many of you know him as the man who helps fix things around town, but what you might not know is how he fixes people too." The room grew quiet. Daniel could hear his own heartbeat. "When Daniel first knocked on my door, by mistake, actually," she added with a small laugh that rippled through the crowd, "I saw a man who carried his grief like a heavy toolbox. But instead of letting it weigh him down, he used it to build bridges to others who were hurting." Grace's eyes met his, and something passed between them that made the rest of the room fade away. "I've watched him teach my daughter how to build a birdhouse, showing her that broken things can become beautiful again. I've seen him sit with Mr. Peterson, for hours after his wife passed, just listening. He's shown us all that the greatest act of courage isn't in being strong, but in being gentle when the world tells you to be hard." Daniel felt tears pricking at his eyes. He blinked them back, but when he looked down at Emma and Jacob, he saw their proud faces shining up at him. "Daniel doesn't just fix fences or leaky pipes," Grace continued, her voice thick with emotion. "He repairs faith, in goodness, in second chances, in the power of simple kindness. He's taught me." She paused, composing herself. "He's taught all of us that even when life breaks your heart, you can use the cracks to let more light in." The silence in the room was profound. Then someone started clapping, and suddenly the whole hall erupted in applause. Daniel saw Mrs. Jenkins dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, and even some of the people who had once whispered about him were smiling warmly. The mayor presented him with a small plaque, but Daniel barely registered the words engraved on it. His mind was full of Grace's words, the way she had seen straight into his heart and shown it back to him, clearer and brighter than he'd known it to be. Later, after the speeches and the dinner and the dancing, Daniel drove home under a canopy of stars. Emma and Jacob had fallen asleep in the back seat, tired from all the excitement. The plaque sat on the passenger seat, catching occasional glints of streetlight through the window. In the quiet of the car, with only the soft breathing of his children behind him, Daniel let himself feel the full weight of what had happened. Grace's words echoed in his mind, but more than that, he remembered the look in her eyes as she spoke them, like she was seeing all of him, every broken piece and every attempt at healing, and finding it all worthwhile. "Oh boy," he whispered to himself in the darkness, his hands tight on the steering wheel. "I think I'm falling in love again." The stars twinkled overhead, silent witnesses to his whispered confession as he drove through the sleeping town toward home. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through Grace's kitchen window as Daniel helped her wash dishes from their shared lunch. The kids played in the backyard, their laughter drifting in through the screen door. It had become such a comfortable routine, him stopping by after his morning deliveries, sharing simple meals, watching their children grow closer. "Oh, the mail's here," Grace said, noticing the postal truck through the window. "Would you mind grabbing it while I finish these plates?" Daniel dried his hands on a dish towel and stepped out onto the front porch. The spring air carried the sweet scent of blooming flowers from Grace's garden. He collected the small stack of envelopes and headed back inside. Bills, ads. He sorted through them, then paused at an official-looking envelope with military markings. "This one looks important." Grace's hand stilled in the soapy water. She turned slowly, her face going pale as she spotted the letter. Water dripped from her fingers as she reached for it with trembling hands. "It's from Mark's unit," she whispered, her voice tight. She tore open the envelope carefully, unfolding the paper inside. Her eyes scanned the first few lines, and Daniel watched as all color drained from her face. "Grace?" he asked softly, taking a step closer. "What is it?" She swallowed hard and began reading aloud, her voice shaking. "Dear Mrs. Turner, we regret to inform you that your husband, Sergeant Mark Turner, has sustained injuries during his deployment. While his condition is stable, medical evaluation has determined immediate medical evacuation is necessary. Sergeant Turner will be transported to Walter Reed Medical Center within the week before transferring to your local VA hospital." The letter fluttered from her fingers to the floor. Daniel caught her elbow as she swayed slightly, guiding her to sit at the kitchen table. "He's coming home," she whispered, pressing her hand to her mouth. "He's hurt, and he's coming home early." Daniel's heart clenched painfully in his chest, but he pushed aside his own feelings to focus on Grace. "What else did the letter say about his injuries?" She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "Not much, just that he's stable but needs ongoing care." "Daniel, what if he's not the same? What if he's changed? Some of the wives I know, their husbands came back different. The things they've seen, what they've been through." "Hey," Daniel said gently, pulling his chair closer. "One step at a time, okay? He's alive, he's stable, and he's coming home to you and Lily. That's what matters right now." Grace nodded, but her hands wouldn't stop trembling. "I don't even know how to tell Lily. She barely remembers him except from video calls." And now, a sob caught in her throat. Daniel reached across the table and took her hand, ignoring the way his heart ached at the touch. "You're not alone in this, Grace. Whatever you and Lily need." "Daniel," she interrupted, her tear-filled eyes meeting his, "I don't know what to do. These past months with you and the kids, it's been like a dream. Having someone to lean on, to laugh with. Mark's been gone so long, and when he calls, he seems more distant each time. What if he comes home and can't handle seeing how much our lives have changed? What if he's angry that I've—" She trailed off, unable to finish. "That you've—" "What?" Daniel asked softly, though he knew the answer in his heart. "That I've let someone else become so important to us," she whispered. The words hung heavy in the air between them. Through the screen door, They could hear Emma teaching Lily a clapping game, while Jacob cheered them on. The sound of their innocent joy made the moment even more bittersweet. "Grace," Daniel said carefully, "you've done nothing wrong. You've been an incredible wife, waiting faithfully for Mark. And you've been a good friend to me and my kids when we needed it most. That's all." But they both knew it wasn't quite true. Something more had grown between them, unspoken but real, like a delicate flower neither had dared to name. Grace wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I need to call Mark's parents, let them know, and start getting the house ready. The letter says he could be here within 2 weeks." Daniel nodded, slowly withdrawing his hand from hers. "Do you want me to take the kids home? Give you some space?" "No," she said quickly. "Please, let them play a little longer. I need things to feel normal, for just a few more minutes." They sat in heavy silence, listening to the children's laughter outside. Finally, Grace stood up, smoothing her shirt with shaking hands. "I should make those calls." Daniel watched her walk to the phone, his heart breaking with every step she took away from him. He wanted to hold her, to promise everything would be okay, but he knew he couldn't. She wasn't his to comfort, not really. She never had been. Later that night, after he'd taken his children home and tucked them into bed, Daniel sat alone in his dark living room. The house felt emptier than ever, the silence deafening. He thought of Grace's face as she read that letter, of all the moments they'd shared that now felt like borrowed time. The tears came then, silent and hot, rolling down his cheeks as he buried his face in his hands. He cried for the love he'd found but couldn't keep, for the family dinners that would end, for the dream of happiness that had seemed so close only yesterday. But mostly, he cried for Grace, knowing the difficult road ahead of her, wishing he could shield her from the pain and uncertainty she faced. In the quiet darkness of his living room, Daniel let himself grieve for what could never be. The morning sun blazed overhead as neighbors lined Cherry Oak Street with American flags and "Welcome Home" signs. Daniel stood at the back of the growing crowd, his children fidgeting beside him. Emma clutched a small bouquet of daisies she'd picked for Grace, while Jacob held tight to his father's hand. The Turners' modest 2-story home had been transformed overnight. Red, white, and blue bunting draped the porch railings, and a massive banner stretched across the garage door proclaimed, "Welcome home, hero." Grace had been up since dawn, checking and rechecking every detail, her nervous energy palpable to everyone who stopped by to help. "Daddy, when is Mr. Turner coming?" Emma whispered, tugging at Daniel's sleeve. "Soon, sweetheart," Daniel replied softly, his throat tight. He'd barely slept, knowing everything would change today. A police escort's sirens wailed in the distance, and the crowd stirred. Lily, who had been sitting on her front steps, jumped up and ran to her mother. Grace's hands trembled as she smoothed her sundress, her eyes fixed on the end of the street. 2 police cruisers rounded the corner, lights flashing, followed by a white van with military insignia. The crowd burst into applause and cheers. Some waved flags while others wiped tears. Daniel's heart pounded as the van pulled into the Turners' driveway. A military chaplain stepped out first, then circled to the passenger side. The crowd fell silent as he and a medical aide carefully helped David Turner from the vehicle. The soldier's muscular frame was seated in a wheelchair, his right leg heavily bandaged. Scars marked the right side of his face, disappearing beneath his collar. His eyes, hard and alert, scanned the gathering before settling on his wife and daughter. "David!" Grace's voice broke as she rushed forward, Lily at her heels. She fell to her knees beside the wheelchair, embracing her husband while their daughter climbed onto his good leg. David's stern expression softened slightly as he held them, though his posture remained rigid. Neighbors surged forward with handshakes and words of gratitude. Daniel held back, keeping his children close. He watched as David's eyes occasionally darted in his direction, questioning and cold. "Let's give them some space," Daniel murmured to Emma and Jacob, but before they could retreat, Lily's voice rang out. "Daddy, come meet Mr. Daniel. He's been helping us so much." The crowd parted slightly, and Daniel felt dozens of eyes turn his way. Grace looked up, her face flushed with conflicting emotions. She stood quickly, smoothing her dress again. "David, this is Daniel Brooks," she said carefully. "He's been a wonderful friend to us while you were away. His children, Emma and Jacob, have been such good company for Lily." Daniel stepped forward, offering his hand. "Welcome home, sir." "Thank you for your service." David's grip was crushing as he shook Daniel's hand, his jaw clenched. "So you're the one who's been spending time with my wife and daughter." It wasn't quite a question, and the edge in his voice was unmistakable. "David," Grace touched his shoulder gently, "Daniel has helped with so many things. The church bake sale, Mrs. Jenkins' fence." "I'm sure he has." David cut her off, his tone clipped. He turned to address the crowd. "Thank you all for coming. I'm feeling tired now." The dismissal was clear. Neighbors began to disperse, though Daniel noticed several lingering to whisper among themselves, casting glances his way. Emma tugged at his sleeve again. "Can't we give Mrs. Turner the flowers?" Daniel hesitated, but Grace had heard. She quickly crossed to them, kneeling to accept Emma's bouquet. "They're beautiful, sweetheart. Thank you." She hugged both children, then stood to face Daniel. Her eyes held apology, and something else regret, perhaps. "We should go," Daniel said quietly. "Let you all get settled." Grace nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "Thank you for coming." As Daniel led his children away, he couldn't help overhearing the harsh whispers from a group of women near the Andersons' mailbox. The nerve of him, showing up today, spending all that time with a soldier's wife. Should be ashamed of himself, taking advantage while that poor man was serving our country. Daniel's cheeks burned, but he kept walking, head high. Emma looked up at him, confusion clear on her young face. "Daddy, why are those ladies mad?" "Sometimes, sweetheart, people don't understand friendship," he answered carefully. "They see what they want to see." Back in their own home, Daniel watched through the window as the last neighbors departed from the Turners' house. The welcome home banner fluttered in the afternoon breeze, and he could see Grace helping David's wheelchair up the porch ramp some volunteers had built last week. His chest ached with the weight of unspoken words and impossible dreams. The past months of shared meals, laughter, and growing closeness seemed to fade like morning mist in the harsh light of reality. He knew what he had to do, though it would break his heart and his children's hearts all over again. "Kids," he called softly, "come here a minute." Emma and Jacob came running from the kitchen, where they'd been drawing welcome cards for Mr. Turner. Daniel sat on the couch and gathered them close. "We need to give the Turners some time alone now," he explained gently. "They have a lot of catching up to do as a family." "But what about dinner and homework with Lily?" Jacob's lower lip trembled. Daniel swallowed hard. "Things are going to be different for a while. Mr. Turner needs time to heal, and they need time together. We'll see them at church, but we should step back for now." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Is it because of what those mean ladies said?" "No, honey." Daniel hugged them both tighter. "It's because it's the right thing to do. Sometimes being a good friend means knowing when to give people space." As his children cried softly against his shirt, Daniel stared out the window at the Turners' house. The porch light had come on as evening approached, casting a warm glow that no longer felt welcoming. He knew in his heart that stepping back wasn't just the right thing, it was the only thing he could do. The evening started peacefully enough at the Turner household. Grace had prepared a pot roast, the savory aroma filling the kitchen as she set the table with her best china. David sat rigid in his wheelchair at the head of the table, his jaw tight as he watched Daniel help carry dishes from the counter. "The kids were so excited about the science fair project," Grace was saying, spooning vegetables onto plates. Daniel helped Emma build the most amazing volcano. The fork in David's hand clattered against his plate. "Seems like Daniel helps with everything these days." The kitchen fell silent. Lily, who had been chattering with Emma about their dolls, stopped mid-sentence. Jacob looked up from his plate, eyes wide. Grace's hands trembled slightly as she set down the serving spoon. "David, please. He's just been kind while you were away." "Kind?" David's voice rose sharply. "Is that what we're calling it? Having another man practically move in while I'm fighting overseas?" Emma grabbed Jacob's hand under the table. Daniel saw their frightened faces and started to rise. "Maybe I should—" "Sit down," David commanded, military authority ringing in his tone. "I want to understand exactly what's been happening in my house." Grace touched David's arm. "Nothing has happened. Daniel and his children have been friends to us, that's all. They've helped me keep my spirits up, just like the other military families do for each other." "Other families?" David's laugh was bitter. "I don't see any other men having dinner at my table. Just this one." He fixed Daniel with a hard stare. "Must be nice, playing house with my wife while I'm getting shot at." "David," Grace's voice cracked. "That's not fair." Daniel kept his voice steady, though his heart raced. "Sir, I understand how this looks, but I promise you, my only intention was to help where I could, as one parent to another." "One parent?" David's face flushed dark. "You mean, as a widower? Is that supposed to make me feel better about you spending time with my wife?" Lily began to cry. Emma quickly put an arm around her friend, while Jacob stared at his plate, shoulders hunched. "I think you're scaring the children," Daniel said quietly. David slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes rattle. "Don't tell me about my child. You have no right at all to act like you belong here." Grace stood up, tears streaming down her face. "Please, both of you. The children don't need to see this. The children need to see their father standing up for his family." David's voice boomed through the kitchen. "Or did you forget who your real family is, Grace? Were you too busy letting this man take my place?" "Nobody took your place," Grace pleaded. "I waited for you every day. I prayed for you every night. Daniel just helped me stay strong while—" "Oh, he helped you stay strong?" David's words dripped with sarcasm. "What else did he help you with while I was gone?" The accusation hung in the air like poison. Daniel stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I would never disrespect your marriage, Mr. Turner, or your service. I'll go now." "Running away?" David challenged. "That's right, leave. Like you should have months ago, instead of worming your way into my home." Emma started crying now too, and Jacob looked close to tears. Daniel's heart ached for all of them. His children, Lily, Grace with her tears, even David with his pain and anger. "Grace," Daniel said softly, "I'm sorry. For everything." He turned to his children. "Emma, Jacob, get your things. We're leaving." "Daniel, wait." Grace stepped toward him, but David's voice cut through the air like a whip. "Let him go, Grace. And when he's gone, maybe you can explain to me why my wife needs another man to lean on." Daniel ushered his children toward the door, their dinner barely touched. Behind him, he could hear Grace's quiet sobs and David's continued angry words. Emma clutched her backpack to her chest, tears running down her cheeks. At the door, Daniel paused for one last moment. "Mr. Turner," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I know what it's like to lose the life you thought you'd have. I pray you find peace with the one you've been given." Then he guided his children out into the gathering darkness, knowing he would not return. The sound of the door closing behind them felt final, like the ending of a dream he'd barely allowed himself to have. In the car, Emma's small voice broke the silence. "Daddy, why was Mr. Turner so angry? We didn't do anything wrong." Daniel gripped the steering wheel, fighting back his own tears. "Sometimes, sweetheart, when people are hurting, they see danger even where there isn't any. Mr. Turner, he's been through a lot." "Will we ever see Lily again?" Jacob asked from the back seat. Daniel watched the Turner house disappear in his rearview mirror, the warm light from its windows growing smaller and smaller. "I don't know, buddy. I don't know." The drive home was silent, except for occasional sniffles from the children. Daniel's heart felt like lead in his chest, heavy with the weight of broken trust and shattered possibilities. He had tried to help, tried to bring light into lives touched by darkness. Instead, he had only managed to cast more shadows. As they pulled into their own driveway, Emma whispered, "I'll miss Grace's cookies." Daniel turned off the engine, sat for a moment in the dark car, and finally found his voice. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." They walked into their house, which suddenly felt colder and emptier than it had in months. Daniel knew he had done the right thing by leaving, but that knowledge didn't make the ache in his chest any easier to bear. Tomorrow, he would have to find a way to explain to his children why they couldn't see their friends anymore. Tomorrow, he would have to start rebuilding the careful walls around his heart that Grace had so gently dismantled. But tonight, He simply held his children close and let them cry, their tears mixing with his own as they mourned the loss of the family they had almost found. The morning sun filtered through Daniel's kitchen window, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. He stood at the counter, mechanically spreading peanut butter on sandwiches for the kids' lunchboxes, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in his chest. A week had passed since that disastrous dinner at Grace's house, and the silence felt heavier with each passing day. Emma sat at the kitchen table, pushing her cereal around with her spoon. "Dad, can we go to the park after school? The one near." She hesitated, and Daniel knew she meant the one near Grace's house. "Not today, sweetheart. I've got a late delivery shift." The words tasted bitter in his mouth. He hadn't taken extra shifts in weeks, not since. He pushed the thought away. Jacob bounced in his chair, milk sloshing dangerously in his bowl. "But what about Lily? She always comes to the park on Wednesdays. She told me last time." Daniel focused on wrapping the sandwiches in plastic, his movements precise and measured. "We'll find another park, maybe the one by the library." "It's not the same," Emma said quietly, her spoon clicking against the bowl. The truth hung between them, unspoken but heavy. Daniel had been driving different routes, taking longer ways home, anything to avoid passing Grace's street. The familiar yellow house with its welcoming porch now felt like a reminder of something lost, something that was never really his to begin with. After dropping the kids at school, Daniel threw himself into his delivery route. The monotony of houses and packages helped dull the ache, but every now and then he'd catch himself looking for Grace's smile in the faces of strangers or hearing Lily's laugh in the wind. That afternoon, he took the kids to the library, hoping books would provide a better distraction than his weak attempts at conversation. Emma wandered the aisles listlessly, while Jacob slumped in a beanbag chair, his usual energy subdued. "Look, they have new dinosaur books," Daniel said, trying to spark some enthusiasm. Jacob just shrugged. "Lily has that one already," he mumbled. "She showed me when we were doing homework at her house." Daniel's chest tightened. He missed those afternoon homework sessions too, the way Grace would help all three kids with their math, her patient explanations mixed with gentle jokes. The way she'd touch his arm when she passed him a cup of coffee, her fingers lingering just a moment longer than necessary. On the drive home, Emma pressed her forehead against the car window. "Dad? Did we do something wrong? Is that why we can't see Lily and Miss Grace anymore?" The question hit him like a physical blow. "No, honey, you didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes grown-ups have complicated reasons for things." "But Miss Grace made you smile again?" Jacob piped up from the back seat. "Like Mom used to make you smile." Daniel gripped the steering wheel harder, his knuckles turning white. How could he explain to his children that sometimes love wasn't enough? That sometimes doing the right thing meant walking away, even when it hurt? The weekend dragged by in a blur of attempted activities. Daniel took them to the movies, to the duck pond, even to the indoor trampoline park. But each outing felt hollow, like they were all just going through the motions. Sunday evening found them in their small living room, the TV playing quietly in the background. Emma sat on the couch, absently petting their elderly cat while staring out the window. A persistent cough interrupted her breathing every few minutes. "I miss our family dinners," she said suddenly, her voice small. It felt like we were whole again. Daniel set down the bills he'd been sorting through, his heart aching. "I know, sweetheart. I miss them too." "Then why can't we go back?" Jacob asked, looking up from his toy cars. "Mr. Turner seems sad. Maybe he needs friends too." The innocent wisdom in his son's words made Daniel's throat tight. "It's not that simple, buddy. Mr. Turner needs time with his family right now. We have to respect that." Emma coughed again, a deep, rattling sound that made Daniel frown. He crossed the room and pressed his hand to her forehead. "How long have you had that cough, Em?" She shrugged, leaning into his touch. "Just today, I think. My throat feels scratchy." Daniel retrieved the children's medicine from the bathroom cabinet, measuring out a dose of cough syrup. As he watched Emma take it, her face scrunching at the taste, he couldn't help but remember how Grace had known exactly what to do when Jacob had scraped his knee last month. She'd cleaned the wound, applied a Band-Aid with dinosaurs on it, and distracted him with a story about her own childhood adventures. The evening wore on, and Emma's cough grew more frequent. Daniel tucked both kids into bed, staying a little longer than usual to read an extra chapter of their bedtime story. As he turned out the lights, he heard Emma coughing again, the sound echoing in the darkness of the hallway. Sitting alone in his kitchen later that night, Daniel stared at his phone. Grace's number was still there, saved under Grace T. His thumb hovered over it for a moment before he set the phone face down on the table. From down the hall came another bout of coughing, and worry gnawed at his stomach. Tomorrow, he decided, he'd call the pediatrician first thing in the morning. The thought of Emma being sick brought back memories of Sarah, his late wife, and how skilled she'd been at handling every childhood illness. The empty space where she should be felt particularly vast tonight, matched only by the newer emptiness left by Grace's absence. Through the kitchen window, Daniel could see the street lamp casting a lonely glow on the sidewalk. Somewhere across town, in a yellow house with a welcoming porch, he wondered if Grace was also sitting up late, thinking about the family that had briefly been part of her life. He wondered if Lily asked about Emma and Jacob, if she missed their playground adventures and homework sessions. Another round of coughing from Emma's room pulled him from his thoughts. Daniel pushed back from the table, heading down the hall to check on his daughter. The sound worried him more with each passing hour, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this night was going to be longer than expected. The harsh glow of Emma's bedside lamp cast shadows across her flushed face as she coughed again, each breath more labored than the last. Daniel pressed his palm against her forehead, his heart dropping at the burning heat beneath his touch. It was nearly midnight, and her fever had only grown worse over the past few hours. "Daddy?" Emma wheezed, her voice barely a whisper. "My chest hurts." Jacob hovered in the doorway, clutching his stuffed dinosaur, eyes wide with worry. "Is Emmy gonna be okay?" Daniel's hands trembled as he wrapped Emma in her favorite purple blanket. "We're going to the hospital, buddy. Get your shoes on." He tried to keep his voice steady, but fear crept in at the edges. The drive to the emergency room was a blur of streetlights and anxiety. Emma's head rested heavily against Daniel's shoulder as he carried her through the sliding doors, Jacob trailing close behind. The fluorescent lights of the waiting room were harsh and unforgiving, making Emma's pale face look even more sickly. "Please," Daniel called out to the nurse at the desk, his voice cracking. "My daughter, she can't breathe properly. Her fever's so high." The next hour passed in a whirlwind of activity. Nurses took Emma's temperature, listened to her chest, and asked endless questions. Daniel answered them all mechanically, one hand holding Emma's small fingers, while the other kept Jacob close to his side. They moved Emma to a proper room, hooking her up to monitors that beeped steadily in the quiet of the night. Jacob curled up in an uncomfortable chair, his dinosaur tucked under his chin, fighting sleep. Daniel sank into the chair beside Emma's bed, watching her chest rise and fall. The doctor had mentioned pneumonia, prescribed antibiotics, and ordered tests. Now all they could do was wait. In the sterile silence of the hospital room, Daniel found himself doing something he hadn't done in a long time: praying. Not the casual prayers he'd say with the kids at bedtime, but a desperate, honest plea. "Please," he whispered, his forehead pressed against Emma's small hand. "Please, let her be okay. I can't lose anyone else." A soft knock at the door made him lift his head. His heart stuttered when he saw Grace standing there, her face etched with concern. But what really surprised him was David beside her, sitting straight in his wheelchair, his expression unreadable. "We heard from Mrs. Jenkins," Grace said softly, stepping into the room. "She saw you rushing out with Emma and called me right away." Daniel straightened, suddenly aware of his rumpled clothes and the tears he hadn't realized were on his cheeks. "You didn't have to come—" "Yes, we did," David interrupted, his voice gruff but not unkind. He wheeled himself further into the room, stopping near Jacob's chair. The boy had finally fallen asleep, his head at an awkward angle. Grace moved to Jacob, gently adjusting his position and draping her cardigan over him like a blanket. The simple gesture made Daniel's throat tight. "Have they said what's wrong?" Grace asked, moving to Emma's bedside. She brushed a strand of hair from the girl's forehead with such tenderness that Daniel had to look away. "Pneumonia," they think. They're running tests." His voice sounded hollow even to his own ears. David cleared his throat. "You need coffee," he stated matter-of-factly. "Real coffee, not the garbage from the vending machine. I saw a 24-hour place down the street." He pulled out his wallet, but Daniel shook his head. "I can't leave them. We'll stay," Grace said firmly. "Both of us. Emma and Jacob won't be alone for a second." David held out a $20 bill, his eyes meeting Daniel's with unexpected understanding. "Let us help. Please." The word "please" from this proud military man, this husband who had every right to hate him, broke something in Daniel's carefully maintained walls. He took the money with trembling fingers, managing a nod of thanks. When he returned 15 minutes later, carrying coffee for all of them, he paused in the doorway. Grace sat in his vacant chair, holding Emma's hand and singing softly an old hymn that Daniel recognized from church. David had positioned his wheelchair next to Jacob, one strong hand resting protectively on the boy's shoulder. It was a scene that hurt to look at, beautiful and painful all at once. These people he'd grown to care for, whom he'd forced himself to step away from, were here in his darkest hour. Not out of obligation, but out of genuine love for his children, for him. Emma stirred slightly, her monitors beeping a steady rhythm. Grace looked up and smiled at Daniel, accepting the coffee with a quiet, "Thank you." David nodded in acknowledgement, his usual gruffness softened by exhaustion and shared worry. Daniel took his place on Emma's other side, reaching for her free hand. In the quiet of the hospital room, surrounded by this unlikely circle of support, he felt something shift. Not hope, exactly, it was too soon for that. But perhaps the first breath of possibility, like dawn breaking after the longest night. The hours crept by, marked only by the steady beeping of monitors and the quiet conversations between the adults. They talked about simple things: favorite movies, childhood memories, funny stories about the kids. David even shared a few lighter moments from his military days, his voice growing warmer as the night wore on. As morning approached, Daniel watched Grace and David tend to his sleeping children. Grace hummed lullabies and adjusted blankets with practiced care, while David kept a vigilant watch, his military training evident in his alert posture despite his exhaustion. The scene before him was bittersweet. A glimpse of the family they could have been, might still be, but in a different way than he'd imagined. Morning sunlight crept through the narrow hospital blinds, painting thin stripes across Emma's pale face. Daniel sat slumped in the hard plastic chair beside her bed, his stubbled chin resting on his chest. Dark circles shadowed his eyes from a sleepless night of watching her breathing, counting each rise and fall of her small chest. The steady beep of monitors filled the quiet room. Jacob was curled up on a small cot in the corner, Grace's jacket draped over him like a blanket. She had insisted on staying through the night, helping Daniel manage both children while the doctors ran their tests. Emma stirred, her dark hair tangled against the stark white pillowcase. "Daddy?" she whispered hoarsely. Daniel snapped awake instantly, leaning forward to smooth her hair back. "I'm right here, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" "Thirsty." Her voice was scratchy from coughing. Daniel reached for the paper cup on the bedside table, helping her take small sips of water. His hands shook slightly as he held the cup to her lips, betraying the exhaustion and worry that weighed on him. The door creaked open, and David Turner wheeled himself into the room. His military posture remained rigid even in the wheelchair, but his eyes held something different today. Not the suspicion of previous encounters, but a quieter, more contemplative look. Daniel straightened in his chair, uncertain how to react to David's presence. The tension between them still hung heavy from their last encounter. David cleared his throat. Grace went to get some coffee and breakfast from the cafeteria. He wheeled closer to Emma's bed, his movements careful and controlled. "How's she doing?" "The fever's down a little," Daniel replied softly, not wanting to wake Jacob. "They're still running tests, but they think it might be pneumonia." Emma's eyes fluttered open at the voices, and she gave David a weak smile. "Hi, Mr. Turner." "Hey there, soldier," David said, his voice gentler than Daniel had ever heard it. "You're being very brave." Daniel watched as David reached out and patted Emma's hand awkwardly but kindly. The gesture, small as it was, spoke volumes. The room fell quiet again, save for the rhythmic beeping of machines. David seemed to be wrestling with something, his jaw working as he stared at Emma's pale face. Finally he spoke, his voice low and rough with emotion. "I've been watching you, Brooks, all night. The way you care for her, the way you haven't left her side for a moment." He paused, his hands gripping the arms of his wheelchair. "Reminds me of how my father was when I was sick as a kid, that kind of devotion. You can't fake that." Daniel met David's gaze, seeing for the first time not an angry soldier, but a man struggling to find his place in a world that had changed while he was away. "I misjudged you," David continued, his words coming slower now, as if each one cost him something. "When I came home and heard about you spending time with my family, I assumed the worst. But watching you here, with your children..." He shook his head. "You were just being the father they needed. The friend my wife needed when I couldn't be there." Daniel's throat tightened with emotion. "Your family helped us heal," he said quietly. "Grace and Lily, they brought light back into our lives when everything felt dark. I never meant to overstep." "I know that now," David admitted. "Thank you for being there when I could not." His voice cracked slightly on the last words, and Daniel saw the glint of tears in the soldier's eyes. It takes a strong man to raise children alone. An even stronger one to open his heart to help others while doing it. Emma had drifted back to sleep, her breathing easier now. Daniel watched her for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "We're all just trying our best," he said finally. "Sometimes that means accepting help when it's offered. Sometimes it means being the one to offer it." David nodded, understanding passing between them. He extended his hand toward Daniel, a peace offering in the quiet morning light. Daniel reached out and clasped David's hand firmly, feeling the strength in the soldier's grip. No words were needed for this moment of forgiveness and respect between two fathers, both carrying their own burdens, both fighting their own battles. The handshake lingered, weighted with unspoken understanding. In that simple gesture, the walls of suspicion and resentment crumbled, replaced by the foundation of something new, not just tolerance, but the beginning of true acceptance. The morning light grew stronger as Emma's fever finally broke. Her cheeks regained their healthy pink glow, and her breathing became steady and deep. Daniel watched as she slept peacefully, her small hand clasped in his. Grace appeared in the doorway with 2 steaming cups of coffee. She handed one to Daniel, who accepted it with a grateful nod. "You look like you could use this," she whispered, settling into the chair next to him. "Thank you," Daniel murmured, taking a careful sip. The warmth spread through his chest, chasing away some of the bone-deep exhaustion. "Not just for the coffee, for everything." Emma stirred slightly, and they both watched her with tender concern. A nurse came in to check her vitals, smiling as she recorded the improved numbers. "She's doing much better," the nurse assured them. "The antibiotics are working well." David wheeled himself into the room shortly after, his military posture somewhat softened by genuine concern. He positioned himself on Emma's other side, his eyes taking in the medical equipment with a familiarity born of his own extended hospital stays. "Jacob's with Lily at my mother's," Grace told Daniel. "They're both worried, but I told them Emma's getting stronger." Daniel nodded, throat tight with emotion. The past few days had shown him how quickly circumstances could bring people together, breaking down walls built by pride and misunderstanding. As the morning wore on, they took turns sitting with Emma. During one quiet moment, when Grace had stepped out to make some calls, David cleared his throat. "Brooks," he said, his voice rough with unshed emotion, "I need to tell you something." Daniel turned to face him, seeing not the intimidating soldier from before, but a man wrestling with his own demons. "When I came home," David continued, "I wasn't just dealing with the physical injuries." His hands gripped his wheelchair's armrests tightly. "The things I saw over there, they follow me. The nightmares, the anger. I took it out on everyone, especially Grace." "PTSD," Daniel said quietly, understanding dawning in his eyes. David nodded sharply. "The doctors at the VA, they try to help. But coming home to find my wife had built a whole new life." He paused, collecting himself. was jealous. Afraid. I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. I never meant to, Daniel started, but David held up a hand. I know that now, he said. Watching you with Emma, it reminded me what being a father means, what being a man means. It's not about pride or territory. It's about taking care of the people who need you. Emma shifted in her sleep, drawing both men's attention. Her face was peaceful now, the worst of the illness behind her. Grace returned, sensing the changed atmosphere between them. She pulled up a chair, forming a protective triangle around Emma's bed. You know, she said thoughtfully, there must be other families like ours. Military spouses trying to cope alone, single parents struggling to make ends meet, people dealing with loss or illness or trauma. David reached for her hand, his expression softening. What are you thinking? A support group, Grace suggested, her eyes brightening with purpose. We could host meetings at the church, share experiences, resources, help each other through the hard times. Daniel sat up straighter, feeling a spark of inspiration. We could organize childcare during meetings, maybe even set up a network for emergency help, like when Emma got sick. I could talk to some of my VA contacts, David added, warming to the idea. There are programs available, but sometimes people don't know how to access them. They spent the next hour outlining ideas, their voices growing animated but staying low for Emma's sake. The shared purpose seemed to heal something in all of them, bridging the gaps that had seemed so wide just days before. By afternoon, Emma's doctor confirmed she was ready for discharge. Daniel gathered her few belongings while Grace helped the nurse review care instructions. Daddy? Emma's voice was still weak but clear. Can we go home now? Yes, sweetheart. Daniel smiled, his heart full. We're going home. David watched as Daniel gently scooped Emma into his arms, her head resting trustingly against his shoulder. Grace held the door open as they made their way out of the room that had contained so much fear and ultimately so much healing. The hospital corridor was busy with staff and visitors, but they moved as a unit, David wheeling alongside as Grace walked with them to the elevator. When they reached the hospital entrance, warm sunshine greeted them, making Emma squint and smile. It's so bright, she whispered, nestling closer to Daniel. They paused in the sunlight. This unlikely family brought together by circumstance and choice. Daniel held his daughter securely. Grace stood with her hand on David's shoulder, and together they faced the future that seemed, somehow, less daunting than before. The church hall buzzed with nervous energy as people filed in, filling the rows of chairs arranged in a wide circle. Afternoon sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting warm colors across worn wooden floors. Daniel stood near the entrance, greeting each arrival with a gentle smile and a name tag. An elderly widow clutched her purse tightly as she entered. I'm not sure I should be here, she whispered to Daniel. Mrs. Peterson, you're exactly where you need to be, he assured her, writing her name in careful letters. We're all just people helping people. Grace moved through the crowd with a tray of cookies and coffee, her natural warmth drawing shy smiles from even the most hesitant attendees. David sat in his wheelchair near the front, his military posture softened by the casual flannel shirt he wore. Though his injuries still limited his mobility, his eyes were clearer now, more present. Once everyone was settled, Daniel cleared his throat. Welcome, everyone. I'm Daniel Brooks. His voice wavered slightly. 2 years ago, I lost my wife. I thought I had to carry that weight alone. He paused, glancing at Grace and David. I was wrong. A young veteran in the back nodded, understanding in his eyes. Others shifted in their seats, recognition crossing their faces. Grace stepped forward. I'm Grace Turner. When my husband was deployed, I felt isolated in my own neighborhood. She reached for David's hand. And when he came home injured, we faced new challenges. But we learned that healing happens in community. David wheeled himself forward slightly. I'm David Turner. When I came home, I was angry, bitter. His voice grew stronger. I pushed away the very people who wanted to help, but sometimes God sends exactly who we need, even if it's not who we expected. A middle-aged woman raised her hand tentatively. I lost my husband last spring, she shared, voice breaking. "The loneliness. Some days it's unbearable." "Tell us more," Daniel encouraged gently. "We're here to listen." As she spoke, others began nodding. A veteran described his struggle to sleep. A single father admitted his fear of failing his children. Each story drew more voices, more shared pain, more understanding nods. Mrs. Jenkins, the elderly neighbor Daniel and Grace had helped with the fence, stood up shakily. "I watched these three help our community, one kind act at a time." She turned to face the room. "They showed me that family isn't just blood, it's who shows up when you need them most." Through the window, they could see the children playing in the church playground. Emma pushed Lily on the swing, while Jacob built a sandcastle nearby. Their laughter drifted in, a counterpoint to the serious conversations inside. "Look at those kids," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "They don't see broken people or complicated situations, they just see friends." Grace squeezed his shoulder. "Maybe we could learn from them." More stories flowed. A widow shared her recipe for getting through holidays alone. A veteran offered tips for managing anxiety. David spoke about his ongoing physical therapy and how accepting help had been his hardest battle yet. Some of the very neighbors who had once whispered about Daniel and Grace now sat forward, tissues in hand, their judgment replaced by admiration. One even stood to apologize publicly for spreading gossip. "We were wrong," she admitted. "Where we saw scandal, God was writing a story of healing." Daniel watched it all, his heart full. Children's laughter continued to filter through the windows, a reminder of joy's persistence, even in hard times. The afternoon light shifted, painting everyone in soft gold. Near the end of the meeting, a young widow raised her hand. "How do you do it?" she asked Daniel. "How do you keep going?" Daniel thought for a moment, looking at his children through the window, then at Grace and David beside him. "One day at a time," he answered. "And never alone. We weren't meant to carry our burdens in isolation." As the meeting wound down, people lingered, exchanging phone numbers and hugs. The church hall, which had held so much pain and truth, now hummed with hope. David chatted with fellow veterans, while Grace organized a schedule for future meetings. Standing by the window, Daniel watched Emma give Lily an enthusiastic push on the swing, their giggles carrying across the playground. Jacob had convinced another child to help with his sandcastle, the structure growing more elaborate by the minute. Grace and David joined him at the window, their shoulders touching in comfortable silence. The three of them observed the playing children, their faces relaxed and peaceful. No longer strangers, not quite family, but something just as precious, friends, bound by understanding and grace. David's voice was quiet but firm. "This is good work we're doing here." Grace nodded, her eyes bright. "It's just the beginning." Daniel watched his children play, feeling the solid presence of his friends beside him. The weight he'd carried for so long felt lighter, shared among hearts that understood. In helping others heal, he had found his own healing too. The late summer air hung sweet and heavy in Grace's backyard, carrying the mingled scents of barbecue smoke and freshly cut grass. Paper lanterns strung between trees cast a gentle glow over the gathering as the sun began its slow descent. Daniel stood by the grill, watching the children dart across the lawn, their hands cupped around blinking fireflies. "Daddy, look!" Emma called out, her face glowing with delight as she carefully showed him a captured firefly. "It's like a tiny star." "Beautiful, sweetheart," Daniel smiled, flipping a burger with practiced ease. "Just remember to let it go. Even the prettiest things need their freedom." Emma nodded solemnly before releasing the insect, watching it spiral upward into the deepening twilight. Jacob and Lily raced past, nets swinging wildly as they chased more of the dancing lights. David sat in his wheelchair near the patio table, showing a group of children how to make paper airplanes. His therapy was progressing well. He could now stand for short periods and walk with a cane on good days. More importantly, the hardness had left his eyes, replaced by a quiet peace. Grace moved between the guests, refilling lemonade glasses and straightening plates of corn on the cob. She caught Daniel's eye and smiled warmly. Their friendship had deepened into something precious and unchangeable, like roots growing beneath the surface of their shared experiences. Mrs. Peterson, the widow from their support group, sat in a comfortable lawn chair, surrounded by other members who had become regular fixtures in their lives. "You know," she said, loud enough for Daniel to hear, "I haven't felt this much like family since Harold passed." Daniel's throat tightened as he remembered his first days after losing Sarah. The hollow echo of an empty house, the children's questions he couldn't answer, the crushing weight of responsibility. He'd believed then that family was something irreplaceable, a treasure lost forever. But here, watching the fireflies rise like hopes in the gathering dusk, he saw how wrong he'd been. Family wasn't just about blood or marriage, it was about hearts that chose to beat in harmony, about hands that reached out in the darkness to pull others into the light. Mrs. Jenkins hobbled over to the grill, her cane tapping against the flagstones. "Remember when you and Grace fixed my fence?" she asked, her eyes twinkling. The whole neighborhood was buzzing with gossip. "Now look at us all here together, proving them wrong in the best way possible." Daniel chuckled, remembering the suspicious glares and whispered judgments. "God has a way of turning our mistakes into miracles," he said, sliding the last burger onto a waiting plate. "Even delivering a package to the wrong address." Grace appeared at his elbow, reaching for the plate. "Best wrong turn you ever made," she teased, then called out to the gathering, "Food's ready, everyone." The yard filled with the happy chaos of people finding seats, passing dishes, and helping David maneuver his wheelchair to the table. Children were corralled, hands were washed, and grace was said. Daniel looked around at the faces illuminated by the paper lanterns, faces that had become as dear to him as family. There was Tom, a veteran from their support group, who now helped David with his physical therapy. Sarah, a young widow, who babysat the children when Daniel worked late. The Hendersons from next door, who had once been the source of the harshest gossip but now brought casseroles to group meetings. Jacob appeared at his father's side, breathless from chasing fireflies. "Dad, can we light the bonfire soon?" "After we eat, buddy," Daniel promised, ruffling his son's hair. "Some things are worth waiting for." As the meal progressed, conversation flowed easily between bites of burgers and corn. Stories were shared, jokes were told, and children's voices provided a constant backdrop of joy. Daniel found himself remembering other summer evenings when Sarah was alive and their family felt complete. But this was different, not better or worse, just beautifully, unexpectedly different. The sky deepened to purple, and stars began to appear, competing with the fireflies for brilliance. David caught Daniel's eye across the table and nodded toward the fire pit. Understanding the silent request, Daniel began gathering wood while Grace helped clear plates. Soon, flames crackled merrily in the stone circle, casting dancing shadows across familiar faces. Marshmallows appeared as if by magic, and children crowded close, wielding roasting sticks with varying degrees of skill. Emma settled into Daniel's lap, sticky fingers clutching a half-eaten s'more. "Daddy," she whispered, "are you still sad about Mommy?" Daniel hugged her close, choosing his words carefully. "I'll always miss her, sweetheart. But look around. God didn't leave us alone. He gave us so many people to love us." Lily flopped down beside them, her dark curls wild from playing. "Can we sing the campfire song? The one about family?" Grace's voice lifted first, clear and sweet in the night air. Others joined in, some off-key, some humming, all united in the simple melody. The flames danced higher, sending sparks to join the stars above. As the song ended, Daniel noticed Jacob, staring intently at the sky. "What do you see, son?" "The stars," Jacob replied thoughtfully. "They're like us, aren't they? Each one alone would be just a tiny light, but together they make patterns, like constellations." Daniel felt tears prick at his eyes, amazed by his son's insight. The children had taught him as much about healing as any adult, with their uncomplicated acceptance and resilient hearts. The evening air grew cooler, and people began to gather closer to the fire. David wheeled himself next to Daniel, his face peaceful in the flickering light. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For being there when I couldn't be. for showing me that strength isn't about standing alone, it's about letting others help you stand." Grace settled on David's other side, her hand finding his naturally. Around the fire, other conversations hummed quietly, Mrs. Peterson sharing her famous cookie recipe, Tom discussing weekend fishing plans with Jacob, Sarah braiding Lily's hair, while Emma watched intently. Fireflies continued their silent dance above the lawn, their light mixing with the stars until it was impossible to tell where earth ended and heaven began. Daniel watched his children's faces, glowing with contentment in the firelight, and felt a deep sense of rightness settle in his chest. "See?" he whispered to them, though they were absorbed in roasting more marshmallows. "God always finds a way to bring us home." The fire crackled softly, sending sparks spinning upward like prayers. Around its warming circle sat people who had once been strangers, now bound together by choice and circumstance and love. Their hearts, like the flames before them, burned bright and steady in the gathering night. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Daniel Brooks, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please, don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.